Cops of Reddit, what is the most corrupt thing you've seen done by a co-worker on the job? Nobody does any illegal it around me because I announce early and often that I'll roll on them if they duck up. I provide examples as well. I'm not getting hemmed up over someone else's bullet. Not cop but security. Found out after he was arrested that a co-worker was stealing state laptops. Because it had state confidential information, the NSA also went after him. Dumbus 19-year-old somehow found a good enough lawyer to put him on house arrest with his parents. Wish I'd kept his number just to find out who the lawyer was. Father was a cop. One of my favorites is that the first sheriff he was under started his day with a case of beer in his office. The 7 AM patrol shift would show up early and help him with a beer before going out on the road. The 70s were a different time. Another good one is when a female LT grabbed the male Sarge by the balls and threatened to squeeze them if he didn't get on board with some questionable policy she was implicating. Wrong word. Correct one close but is escaping me. All these guys were fired, so that's good. 2 were direct co-workers. The others were neighboring departments. Took custody of stray cat. Instead of properly handling it, he took it to a field and shot it. Then lied about why. Took custody of stray cat. Instead of handling it properly, just released it, and then lied about it. Used his position of authority to jet stuff from a subordinate civilian employee and other casual sexual harassment. Wrote out tickets to parked cars and then paid the tickets himself. Because Darty became mental and needed to look like he was doing something without being confrontational with other people anymore. Got addicted to opiates and started stealing from evidence room. Got addicted to opiates and started stealing from evidence room. Guy I used to work with kept searching people on justifiable grounds, but they were on the thin side. For 3 searches running, the guys claimed that he stole either their money or drugs. Apparently he had a spotty history with similar allegations. Nobody ever actually came forward to make the complaint. I reported it, but if the victim doesn't report it, then there is nothing they can do. I'm assuming they contacted the victims since we had their details on file, but I'm not entitled to details of the investigation. Thankfully that ducker is long gone for some other bullet. His wife is a detective and mysteriously some drugs went missing twice which he blamed on me. However, investigation showed that I was not the last person to have touched them, and it seemed like she was trying to get back at me. She got investigated for those missing drugs. They amazingly turned up again, fallen behind a shelf in the property store which she found. I'm not a cop, but this is the best misuse of police power I have personally witnessed. Years ago, during a particularly cold and snowy winter, I was coming home late one night early morning. The streets were pretty clear, as it had snowed right after an ice storm, and the roads were coated with a combination of black ice and compacted snow. As I am slowly driving down the road, I see someone in the distance spinning out and doing donuts in the middle of a 4-lane avenue. Not out of control, just slowing, doing spin-outs in the middle of the street. As I get closer, I notice it's a local city cop car. Just when I notice it's him, he must have noticed I was coming towards him because he recovered from his spin and pulled off into the closest side street. I pass where he pulled in and continued on my way. After I get about a quarter mile away, I see him in my rearview mirror pull back out onto the street and start doing his spin-outs again. I laughed all the way home. So this isn't really an egregious abuse of power, but it's something I will always remember. I used to work a late night shift where I'd be driving home every night at about 1 AM. There is this one stretch of road that was always frustrating to me because you have to go through 6 traffic lights, and if you get hit by a red on one of them, you'll get hit with a red on all of them despite there being no other cars on the road. Well, one night on the way home, I got stopped by the first red light and cursed my luck. I cursed my luck again when shortly after a cop pulled up next to me. It wasn't uncommon for cops to pull me over this late at night, probably for random DUI checks or something, and it was justice on the road that night. So we get through light number 1 and get stopped again at light number 2. I looked over at the cop and he rolled his eyes at me, which made me laugh, and I shrugged my shoulders to imply, well, what can ya do? Just gotta wait. And then the greatest thing happened. As we are rolling towards traffic light number 3, the cop flashed his lights for a second to cause the red to change to a green. He then proceeded to flash his lights at the next 3 traffic lights to trigger the green so we didn't have to stop the rest of the way through. I've seen my co-workers be complete and utter pieces of it, but nothing actually corrupt comes to mind. Turn away a victim of domestic violence for a bullet excuse, then later on message them over social media to ask for a date. Not a cop, but worked for the courts at the time. The chief of police was fired and there were allegations he sexually assaulted a woman he arrested and he was also extorting money. There's a pending FBI investigation about stealing drugs while working on a narc team. I need to look it up and see what happened with that. Son of a police officer in Germany here. Tons of small-it. Stealing from each other. Deliberately drawing a produce out to make the other person late, etc. But the worst. Superiors strategically bullying others if they dislike them or are jealous. The absolute worst is probably when they are in training and get their guns. A surprising amount of officers in training end up committing suicide. UK dude here. Not me but my father. When we were younger we had planned to go to a big indoor water park. Wet n Wild. I don't remember what the occasion was but something like a birthday. Anywho. On said day his car broke so instead of letting us down he got a friend to take him to work and he borrowed an undercover police car for the day. Needless to say they found out and I believe he got demoted for it. I was young though. Definitely not a cop but this is the infamous Windows 95 scam a lot of Melbourne cops were in on back in 1994-5. Shop windows get smashed every now and again in cities at night and they need to be repaired immediately. This is lucrative work for glaziers, and some started paying spotters fees to the person that reported the damage. This came out of the exorbitant fees they'd charge. Cops started smashing windows in stores themselves to claim the finder's fee. It got big, and started costing stores and their insurers a shitload. Not a cop but the most corrupt thing I've personally seen cops do was back in 2001, before camera phones, in San Francisco. Me and my friends were DJing this after party and the SFPD showed up to bust it. The 2 hostesses went out to try and talk them out of the raid. I watched from a second story window as they chatted, and then the 2 male cops pulled out a roll of circular SFPD stickers. They proceeded to paste the stickers on the breasts of the hostesses and grope the it out of their tits. Then they left laughing and the 2 girls came in all freaked out. We called the SFPD complaint line but absolutely nothing happened. My friend even got a letter to the editor about the incident published in the, now defunct, Bay Guardian newspaper and absolutely nothing happened. Nice try. Internal affairs. Might want a serious tag on this one. Oh come on Sessions. You're not even trying now. People who use novelty accounts. Like why? Do you think everything is a joke? It gets pretty irritating and most of them are just trolls. That's why I don't trust them. Repeated theft of tens of thousands from the Boeing company. An entire crew of mechanics corroborating with a manager to receive little to no work as well as leaving work and in some cases not even showing up while still being paid. Oh I love these types of questions as usually cops will never admit to anything unless you're in their little circle. I'm not a cop, but I work with cops often, and I've seen cops steal petty stuff, officially lie to me, other people and in their reports, break laws and admit to me ridiculously ducked up it they've done to people without any remorse, usually bragging in a sadistically jokey manner. I used to work for a company that had a contract to do work with the city we live in. The company owner used to be on the city council, but recused himself once he got the city contract. The city had a bond issue for schools funded by sales tax. After the bond expired past the time that it was approved, they kept the sales tax going and gave the money, $7 million, to my boss in the form of a no-interest loan. Last year the FBI raided the mayor's office and everybody got indicted because they had been doing stuff like that all over town. The city is Beaumont, California as anybody wants to look into it further. One of our cops was just arrested and charged with solicitation of sodomy to a minor who was involved in a case he was on. Dude was also a ducking teacher at the high school. After we were attacked physically by someone in a single residency hotel, My partner at the time gave him one last punch in the gut after we physically controlled him with handcuffs. I didn't report it. Not a cop, but I know many, including this one. TLDR. Sheriff's son gets caught trafficking sugar. Doesn't even really do any jail time. Sentenced 5 years. But gets to do 3 years house arrest and the rest probation. Any regular citizen would probably get 10-20 years in prison. About 25 years ago, my mom worked for a lawyer next to the police station in our once little town in Texas. She was friends with the dispatch lady and they often went to lunch together. My mom asked why the ambulance was there at least 2 or 3 times a week. No joke. The dispatch lady said the prisoners keep falling in their cell and hitting their head. Our family was friends with one of those city cops. We never found out who was hurting the prisoners, if he partook in that or not. I once witnessed a cop shoot at a deer inside the city limits. The deer didn't seem to be injured and where we live they are quite tame and easily approachable. It was just standing there looking around and the cop lifted his gun and shot twice at it. It dropped to the ground. He clearly had fatally shot the animal. Never quite understood the reasoning behind it, but it was late and I guess he thought no one was around to watch him as he tried dragging the deer core to the back of his police truck. Not a cop, but I am like 75% sure a detective recently killed in Baltimore was killed to prevent him from testifying against another cop. Dude was shot with his own gun. Had a different partner than normal that day and was set to testify in a grand jury against a dirty cop in a few days. There has been a $215K reward out for information that leads to the case being solved and the BPD had a huge chunk of the city on basically lockdown for several days and it hasn't yet smoked out a suspect. No ducking way was this some random act of violence. Was a security liaison for a railroad that had its own police department. Basically I did all the work and patrolling, but when anything happened I would have to radio the officers to make an arrest. One night I witnessed the severe beating of a homeless man who was caught riding on one of the trains. The man did nothing to warrant said beating. The officer broke his face is the only way I can put it. After the beating the officer looks at me and says you saw him spit on me and go for my gun. After taking him to the local jail the officer offered to take me to McDonald's and over our meals tell me if I ever needed a recommendation he would be more than willing to give me one. Bumping into co-workers at clan meetings. A guy pulls into a spot at a Hurricanes game. Cop flashes his lights and the guy moves. Cop pulls into the spot. Obligatory I'm not a cop. Saw a cop turn on the sirens. Drive through 2 intersections. Pull a U-turn at the light. Turn off the sirens and go to the McDonald's drive-through. In my city cops who tell on other cops get murdered. Google the murder of Detective Sean Suter. He was set to testify on these corrupt cops and the day before he was shot with his own gun in an alley. Not a cop, but late one night I was going through a green light and the other side had a red light and there was a cop sitting there waiting. I guess it was too long for him cause he flashed his lights for a second to get through it lol. Semi on topic. I've never understood why criminals don't grasp the concept of staying quiet during questioning. I mean really just don't say a single word and you're so much less likely to be charged with anything unless there's hard evidence. I briefly worked in a health related field when in Vietnam. I didn't see this personally but heard of it the day after. A man arrives injured at a public hospital after a moderate scooter accident. He has spinal swelling, which can be easily treated with a steroid injection. He has no cash so the hospital staff refuse to treat him. Prioritization of care by money wealth is the unofficial rule. When his family finally arrives with money it is too late and he is permanently paralyzed. Cost of care medicine demanded $5. Not corrupt but I once saw police charger stop in front of me, drift into the other lane, and speed off. That's acceptable. Most times the cops around here do that to get through crowded intersections. Makes traffic worse than it already is. Not a cop, but this piece of it. TLDR. Corrupt cop busted for theft of drugs. Going to go to prison. Instead kills himself in traffic accident. Wife more than likely claims insurance. An old manager stole roughly $50,000 from the company over an 8-year span. It was interesting, because she was so by the books. I guess you have to be when you're doing all the stealing. To clarify, she stole the money through various channels. Our points program, taking merchandise, marking down items for family members to pennies, gift cards, and layaway scams. 911 dispatcher here. I had to rat out an officer for asking me to lie, relatively minor, but still pissed me off. He was responding to a residential silent panic alarm. While he was still en route, he asked me to call the alarm company to get a responder. I called the alarm company and they asked if officer was on scene. His status still showed en route, so I asked just in case we didn't update it. He wasn't there. Alarm company said they won't call anyone until officer goes on scene. Makes sense. I tell the officer and he replies back, well, tell them I'm on scene then. He's notoriously a D. So I didn't reply back and simply told my supervisor. She pulled a copy of the transmissions and went to his sergeant. My father's story from the time when this country still had the protection of the sickle and hammer dangling above its head. He and his friend were at a sea city for a trip, bought some ice cream and were just eating them at some steps, outside, on a house block on some main street. Then comes over the police, looks at them and asks them what are they doing. After a simple explanation the dude bust them in for nothing, and I don't remember if it was a couple of hours of full day, slams them into the cell. But that wasn't the worst part. My father saw on the police station as a, and I quote, some over the top snarky fatitch was slapping around a kid that wasn't even 18 years old. And it wasn't the little slap on the cheek. They were full itch slap from left and right. Let's just say we have a state trooper who is family of our extended family. Imagine every self-centered, egotistical stattery you could meet and then double that. And that was this guy. Someone stole his daughter's iPad and he used the Find Me app to track it down, and then all his resources as an officer to make this poor sap pay for it in some of the most underhanded and despicable ways. Even though the guy admitted it when confronted and he got iPad back. The trooper and his buddies made this guy's life hell for a few weeks. Was pulled over 6 times in 2 days. Last one for suspicion of DUI. Had his car towed twice. Was given a parking and handicap spot ticket. I heard that the poor sap was a young 20-something years old and was so traumatized he didn't leave his house for a few months. I'm waiting to see a story about a cop extorting people for donuts. When I think of police corruption, I always remember this episode of This American Life. Full stop. An old friend of mine who is a sheriff's deputy in another state would send official looking demands to various social media and online message board sites to harass, unmask, or otherwise duck with people who had talked bad about him online. Not a cop, but my buddy who has said that the blue code absolutely exists, and that itty cops will tell you it doesn't and good cops will tell you it does. None of the other people I know who are cops admit to the blue code, and I know a lot of cops. And similarly enough, they're all itty people, at least outside of work. Family member was a cop. Early in her career, early 80s, she was in a department in a notoriously bad city. At her retirement party, some of her co-workers got up and told stories. The worst one was a bunch of cops responding to someone who called the suicide hotline in the middle of the night. Found him getting ready to hang himself. Told him he better not do it until after 2 AM. When the new shift came in, he did just what they asked, waited until 3 AM before hanging himself. Not a cop, of course. My father, when he first started law, worked as a public defender for a while. Cops arrested a woman for shoplifting. Said she had bottles of booze under a newspaper in her shopping cart. They had a picture too, except that the date on the newspaper was 3 days after the arrest. They had gone back and fabricated the evidence to justify the arrest over a shoplifting charge. And of course, despite being caught in this on the witness stand, they were never held accountable. On the other hand, the woman got to go free. Acquaintance with a Leo. I watched him run out of a house party and assault a guy walking down the street and search him since he was a known drug dealer. Right before that he had just crushed some stolen Vicodin to snort. Same officer told me about planting fingerprints on a stolen vehicle. The suspect ran and successfully evaded but was caught later on. They needed to tie him to the crime since they knew it was him. Same officer was told by the sheriff that all officers could charge an extra 100 hours of OT to the budget as we just had a double homicide in our small town and they were all ramped up for the investigation. He told them to just make sure you can give an excuse for the time. Different officer sells Molly on the side. Offered to hook me up while at a party with 10 or so other officers present. Yo, I declined. Nice try, internal investigator. Here we go. Brace yourself for the sound of brotherly silence. No cop will actually answer this question. The blue wall of silence is a big thing. They are a gang. I've seen a cop turn on his sirens just so people would make room for him to merge, then immediately turn them back off. Entitled ass. Down in Miami Gardens to be specific. The police chief was arrested in a prostitution sting, trying to solicit a prostitute, and was fired before he got out of jail the next morning. Not an abuse of power type thing, but somebody in my year at school dove off a bridge into a local river. This is something people often do during the summer here, and the bridge isn't a huge height off the water. Problem was, he overestimated how good his swimming abilities were. He couldn't swim. 2 policemen had stopped earlier to supervise what was going on, make sure nobody was being an idiot. When the guy jumped in, we all ran to them for help. The younger policeman told us that it was against health and safety law for them to jump in and save him and they needed the proper water training. All the while, his older partner was ripping off his radio and stab vest to jump in and save him. Everyone got out of that alive and well thanks to that guy. I hope he didn't get into trouble for it.